morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we need to take a little bit of a look at Corviknight VMAX. And look, we all knew that Corviknight was going to get a VMAX at some point. This is not a surprising VMAX like some of them are. This is one that we absolutely should have had on our radar, because Corviknight is one of the main new Pokemon from Generation 8. Is it any good though? Well, our translation comes from the lovely Antoine Boulet, and if we start off with Corviknight V and we start off with the basics, we got 210 HP, which isn't terribly low but isn't terribly high. On the higher end, I think, is the fairest way to put it. But we do have a retreat cost of 1, which is quite nice. That means we've got U-turn board here, which makes me rather happy indeed. And we've got a resistance to grass. And look, I know like these Rillaboom decks aren't good, and I keep saying it, but one day grass might be good again. And the weakness to fire is not good. Now, to be fair, about 5 months after this comes out, Welder will go away. But even then, Centiskorch should still be a decent, viable deck. So I'm not sure that fire's a good weakness. Being a metal Pokemon means you're not really hitting anything for weakness, which is a little bit sad. But it does mean that you do have access to Metal Saucer to accelerate energy, which is the best thing about metal Pokemon right now. Yeah, you could throw in things like Metal Goggles so you take a bit less damage, and Lucario and Melmetal so you take a bit less damage, but I think this is one that's probably going to like Metal Saucer a little bit more. Now, if we start off with the attacks here, we've got 1 Metal Energy, 30 damage, the defending Pokemon can't retreat during your opponent's next turn. And we've seen a whole bunch of attacks like this over the years. This is far from the first time we've seen a, hey, you can't retreat next turn attack. But it hasn't stopped being useful. You know, something like Crobat V is still played in the majority of decks. And Crobat V generally is played, you know, there's exceptions like Eternatus decks, but it's generally played in decks that just literally don't have the energy to attack. So if you drag that into active with something like a Boss's Orders, your opponent has to find a switching card. And if they don't find a switching card, okay, it might take you 6 turns, but you will eventually, get a KO on it for 2 prizes. But I actually like this against Dedenne so much more, because Dedenne's got resistance. Now, Dedenne's got a minus 20 resistance, which means you'll be doing 10 damage, which means you are 16 hit KOing a Dedenne. But the important thing here is, if you're doing this, you're not trying to KO a Dedenne. What you're actually doing here is trying to deck your opponent out, trying to just essentially end the game. And this will work sometimes. I am convinced this will work sometimes. Make sure your opponents add a switching card. Maybe it's an online tournament with open deck lists. Maybe it's game 2 and you counted how many they had in game 1 or whatever. And when you know your opponent is out of switching cards, Boss's Orders a Dedenne, and then just attack. And your opponent, again, unless they're playing any lightning energy, which most decks aren't, they will be stuck in the active, and eventually they will deck out. I've told you many times the story of when I did this with a Gabite against a Hawlucha. Hawlucha's not allowed to attack a non-EX. Gabite is resisted by Hawlucha, so I did 0 damage, and my opponent had no switching cards, and they decked out and I won the game. That's what you can do with Corviknight against Dedenne here. So I don't think these are the best attacks. I don't think it's a reason to play the card, but I do think it's a really nice little bonus, especially while Dedenne is still in the format. But the main attack here, 2 metal, 1 colorless energy, 190 damage. This Pokemon can't use Sky Hurricane during your next turn, which makes it like a weirdly weak Zacian. Because Zacian for free energy does 230, for anyone keeping score that's an extra 40 damage, and can't use the attack next turn. Well, technically it can't attack, but given that it has no other attacks. It really doesn't matter about that slight difference in wording. And of course, Zacian's got the really nice ability, but then you've got a fairly useful first attack, so I don't know, call it a draw. My point here is that this is a nice attack that does a decent amount of damage, but when we compare this to Zacian, it's not just that Zacian does an extra 40, it's that Zacian just hits a whole bunch of key numbers. Because you see, the vast majority of Pokemon V have between 200 and 220 HP, with the odd one like Zamazenta getting up to 230, and then there are a couple which are silly exceptions we're not going to worry about. To put it another way, yeah, fine, Zacian does an extra 40 damage, but far more importantly, Zacian should be one-hit KOing the vast majority of Pokemon V. Corviknight is only one-hit KOing those on the weaker end, like Crobat. It's not to say it's a bad attack, but it is to say if we're just looking at Pokemon Vs, I don't know why anybody would ever play this over Zacian. I like those attacks that stop your opponent retreating, and I've won a bunch of games over the years using those attacks. But the fact is, when I played Gabite, I didn't play it for the You Can't Retreat attack. I was playing a Garchomp deck. But I really liked having the option to stop them retreating with Gabite. And the game I told you about was not the only game I won with Gabite. I won a few games with Gabite. But make no mistake about it, I was playing a Garchomp deck. So the first attack isn't a reason to play it. And the second attack is fine, but it's just a worse version of Zacian. Less HP, less damage. It's a bad combination. Hopefully the VMAX will give us a reason to play it. Well, it kind of does. You see, starting off, we got up to 320 HP, which again is kind of mid-range for a Pokemon VMAX. We have free retreat now here, and free retreat is awesome after a KO, if you're switching, etc., etc. You've got a free retreater to whack into the active while you muck about trying to get everything else rolling, so this is kind of awesome. And you've still got that same resistance to grass, that same weakness to fire. I still don't like the weakness to fire. There's still not really much we can do about it, which of course is a lie, because not only do we have weakness guard energy, but we also have coating metal energy, which counts as a metal energy, but will also remove your weakness. So actually, yeah, there really is a lot we can do about it. Now, we have an ability here which reads, prevent all effects of your opponent's abilities done to this Pokemon, which basically means it's always wearing Stealthy Hood. Stealthy Hood prevents all effects of your opponent's abilities done to the Pokemon this card is attached to, and that's what this does. You prevent all effects of your opponent's abilities done to this Pokemon, which means that if your opponent's got those really annoying abilities which they're trying to use against you, it's not going to work. It's not going to stop something like a Mewtwo and Mew copying abilities, or copying attacks. It doesn't turn off abilities, but it just means that any that specifically target you aren't going to work, which is going to be kind of annoying for your opponent if they've got those kind of abilities. Now, to be fair, this was a little bit better a little while ago. I mean, certainly things like Giratina dropping damage counters would have been super annoying, and we've still got Pokemon that drop damage counters. Volcarona GX is still running around. There's that Flapple, but I don't really see a huge amount of play, unfortunately. Any kind of gusting abilities will get you, but although we've got some gusting abilities, again, they're just not seeing a huge amount of play. But it gives you protection for things you're expecting and things you're not, which is pretty good. But just be looking out for abilities that drop damage counters, abilities that remove energy, abilities that seek to move you in and out of the active. I mean, certainly something like Fione. There we go. There's an example of a relevant Pokemon around at the moment that you would be stopping, because Fione makes your opponent switch their active Pokemon, but because it's making you switch Corviknight VMAX, it means the ability is affecting a Corviknight, which means it won't work. Now, moving on to the attack, we've got 2 metal, 1 colorless energy, same as before. You still can't use it during your next turn, same as before. But you do 240 damage. Which I'm torn here, right? Because on the one hand, I told you that we really needed to hit up to 230. Now we're hitting 240. Now we're rolling. I like it. And on the other hand, if Zacian is a 2-prize Pokemon that for the same attack cost can hit just 10 damage less, but there's a huge difference between 190 and 230, because that means a vast majority of Pokemon V come into or out of range, there really isn't much difference between 230 and 240. It just isn't. I mean, there is no Pokemon V that's actually got 240 HP. You do have Steelix, which goes up to 250, but you'll still be out of range. So that's not terribly relevant. So you're just not hitting big numbers. I would say that 240 puts you over the hump to get a one-hit KO on Pikachu and Zekrom, but of course Pikachu and Zekrom has a resistance to metal, so actually no, it won't put you over the hump to get a KO on Pikachu and Zekrom. So I'm just not loving the amount of damage you're doing here compared to something like a Zacian V. Yeah, sure, you've got an extra 80 HP and you've got free retreat and you've got that nice ability. But I've already told you that as nice as this ability is in theory, and it is, there really are not that many Pokemon around. You know, Stealthy Hood is seeing very little play right now, purely because there are just not that many abilities around which are going to seek to annoy you. And even something like Fione, well, you can't attack 2 turns in a row, so Fione making you switch would actually be a really good thing. The one thing I do like about this is you can combine it with Memory Capsule, because essentially both attacks say you can't use that attack next turn, but they don't actually stop you attacking. So essentially what you can do is use the VMAX attack, and then the V attack, and then the VMAX, and then the V, etc. I think you're doing a lot of damage. I love the damage that you're doing. I love the free retreat. I love the ability. But I do have to put this side by side with Zacian V and go, I love Zacian's ability more than this. I love giving up 2 prizes rather than 3. It's an extra 100 HP, sorry, not an extra 80, but still, it's, you know, that extra 10 damage doesn't do enough to make me want to play it, and Intrepid Sword's a great ability, and this is a free prize Pokemon. I do think the fact that it can basically one-hit KO any Pokemon V is good. The fact that you've got Metal Saucer to accelerate that energy, you can use Turbo Patch before your VMAX, etc. There's plenty of things to like about this. But by the same token, I just think it's kind of underwhelming when you compare it to something like Zacian. I'm still giving it between 3 and 4 Wassies. We don't give half Wassies, that would be barbaric. Because you're still talking a 320 HP Pokemon with free retreat that does 240 damage and is immune to abilities. That's kind of awesome. And this should survive the 2022 rotation, which will get rid of Zacian. So maybe if abilities become big in the future, this will be amazing. Or the kind of abilities that affect your Pokemon. In 18 months' time, when Zacian's gone and this isn't, maybe this will be amazing. As it stands at the moment, I'm just not seeing a compelling reason to play this over Zacian. And I apologise. But I'd like to know what you think. So let me know in the comment section, would ya? Go nuts. Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at The Wassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.